All right, sorry about that. We are live. Doesn't seem bright enough at all. All right. Happy St. Patrick's Day. We all stayed up till midnight and greeted the leprechaun. We're all doing good. So, last weekend there was a library sale at the bookstore in Little Rock, the main bookstore. And I guess where they just get rid of a lot of their surplus books that they accumulate. I imagine the library accumulates a lot of books. So I went through there and I got like 30 books for $15 and just wanted to share it with you. Just a little smattering of the stuff I find interesting. So we'll just go at random here. First, we've got the classic C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man, written in the 1950s, I believe. And this is C.S. Lewis's seminal work on progressivism, environmentalism, relativism. It's just about the establishment trying to take man out of the equation. The imago Dei of man. They don't like it. They don't like that man was made in the image of something divine, and so they're trying to abolish him from the human equation. It's a bit redundant, but it is actually what's happening. It's like the academics are trying to get people to think in non-human contexts. Um, that book pairs quite nicely with the third book of the space trilogy, That Hideous Strength. It's a novel about scientism and about how science ultimately is doing the bidding of a disembodied head that we sometimes call artificial intelligence, and sometimes we call it the devil himself. So, Abolition of Man. Now we have, written in the 20s, Aleister Crowley, Diary of a Drug Fiend. Now, there's a reason that they call Aleister Crowley the Great Beast, because that book in particular, and really his writings, are the most self-centered, or what some would call Luciferian expressions ever created. Um, if you take Lucifer to mean that entity that knows of God, knows the power of God, but wants to be equal or greater than God. And sometimes he sees helping humans as his path to achieving this objective. And sometimes he thinks he'll never achieve this objective, so he hates humans and God equally, and and spirals, and tries to destroy them both. This is what Luciferianism is. And it's interesting that I would talk about that, because the very next book I've got is The Complete Works of John Milton. And if you are in the know, you know that the character Lucifer the name Lucifer appears in the Bible, but the character does not. The Western character of Lucifer was created by the most extensive and poetic biblical commentary that's ever been done. And it's a little poem called Paradise Lost by John Milton, in which he literally gives us the character of Lucifer as we know him today. And he does a very accurate job. Because Well, I'll have to break that down later because the whole book, you know, all the pageantry of heaven and the war in heaven, that's all about the in utero experience. It's we are in this symbolic language in the context of Paradise Lost. The human being is Lucifer because all we know is that we came into being and we were very appreciative of our existence and we were very worshipful of the Creator. But at some point, we wanted to be equal, and we realized we were not equal to the Creator. The only thing equal to the Creator is the truth, and the symbolic personification of the truth is Jesus. And so Jesus was chosen instead of Lucifer, and this pissed Lucifer off, and he ended up in a place we call hell, which is where there is chaos between you and God. It's the most perfect poetic symbolism of what the human nature and the human soul are actually doing, what's actually happening. Which is why nobody ever reads it anymore, because everyone's scared of it. Next we have critical essays on Edmund Spenser. Edmund Spenser from the 1500s. To me, he's the gap between, you know, you've got the spirit of truth. Look at that sweet baby. Spirit of truth moving through time and moving through language, moving through literature. And so after Dante, the next big movement symbolically was the whole Fairy Queen saga of Edmund Spenser. But it's very Old English and it's very dense, so I like to have commentaries available when I read that stuff, just to compare notes with other writers. In Praise of Folly, this is critical commentary. Oh, wait, no, this isn't commentary. This is the In Praise of Folly by Erasmus. Erasmus, pivotal figure. This is a very famous book. Don't have a lot of commentary on him right now, but I guarantee you I will if I get around to reading that. Man's Fate, Andre Malraux. French novelist. Some period. Oh boy, here's a good one. A Fearful Symmetry. Northrop Frye's study of William Blake. William Blake is a very pivotal figure in the timeline of real literature. He was right in that period with Shelley and Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge. Only he was the most religious and the best poet of all of them, and the best artist in general, which is why he wasn't even appreciated for many years. But from him until George MacDonald, there's nobody really super important in, we're talking about peak top symbolic language literature. And we've got Bloom's major poets of World War I. This is very important. First of all, Harold Bloom, I know he is a tiny hat relativist, literature commentator, literature critic. But I've been reading him so long that you kind of learn, he kind of really taught me how in poetry there's layer after layer after layer. Now, what you're trying to achieve when you're studying these layers of poetry are different things. Bloom, obviously an agnostic, um, was trying to justify his existence by his study, which doesn't mean it was a bad study. It just means his objective for it was not completely correct. Whereas a guy like Northrop Frye, who's a very strong Protestant Christian, his whole objective in studying literature was to um, understand the nature of man's place in the universe under God better. And so that's why he's always going to be a little bit, his thought processes are always going to be a little bit more complete than Harold Bloom's. Next we have The Outsider. This is the first work by a guy named Colin Wilson, which is just a fun little overview of famous artists in general, like Van Gogh, Nietzsche, who else are we talking about? Nijinsky, the dancer. Just talking about how, like, the more you commit yourself to art, the more you realize the materialism of regular society is actually hell. And so the more, it's almost like the more artistic you are, the harder it is going to be able to live in a relativistic materialist context. Yeah, you become an outsider. The more of an artist you are, the more of an outsider you are. What? Can I help you? Okay, a collection of critical essays by Shelley. Shelley's important because Shelley wrote his own chapter in the whole Luciferian saga when he wrote the Prometheus Unbound. That was really the human spirit just trying to justify the Promethean or Luciferian urge. And it's very well written. There are some of the passages in Prometheus Unbound are, when I say poetic, I don't just mean the subject matter, I mean the actual language. The rhyme is so perfect that it almost kind of makes a chorus in your subconscious. Like, it starts a harmonized ringing in your ears, like the singing of angels. It's weird and possibly dangerous, but it's real. Next we have Critical Views of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Obviously, big figure in American literature. And, he did tap into a vein of existential romanticism in his works. But Fitzgerald was by far a poetic or intellectual giant. Next we've got Dante. That's all it says, but you know how I love him, and so this is just get some commentary. I'll find out, at this point in my life and my reading, it takes me a couple paragraphs to figure out exactly where the writer is spiritually and intellectually. Here is an anthology of romanticism. Just a nice thing to refer to every once in a while. Next, we've got the Rubaiyat, Omar Khayyam. This is a very interesting poem written by the Persian Omar Khayyam. I want to say in like the official story is written in like the 800s or 900s, but then a English poet named Edward Fitzgerald translated it in the mid 1800s, and it became famous. And it's just a beautiful poem. And it really shows the romantic side of Islam. I could read it online, hopefully. I think it needs to be updated, though, because if Edward Fitzgerald, he translated it to English, and obviously used a lot of the words and vernacular of the mid 1800s, but I think it could be updated into a slightly more modern version that the modern man could appreciate a little more. Bloom's Study of HD. Woman poet I am not very familiar with, but if she's good, I will become familiar with her. La Rochefoucauld's Maxims. Read that a long time ago. There's some good maxims and some obscure ones, but just a good look into the way that the French were thinking in the 1600s. The Strength to Dream. This is another Colin Wilson book. It's just called Literature and Imagination. Colin Wilson wanted so bad to be a poet or a novelist and take his place in that long, gloried line, but he's just a commentator. He's just good at commenting on the stuff. And probably kind of from the school of Bloom. He was more agnostic than fundamental in any sense. And so when you're like that, you're trying to justify yourself and your existence more than you're trying to discover the truth of reality. Critical essays about J.D. Salinger. We'll talk about him someday. He was a major force in kind of a agnostic spiritualism. Holden Caulfield was a rejection of modernism, a rejection of relativism, but that's the thing about Salinger. He expressed the rejection so perfectly. He just didn't offer the reader many solutions besides Stoicism. Stoicism is a solution. It's hard though. It's not easy. D.H. Lawrence, collection of critical essays. One about D.H. Lawrence, the over-sensual little Englishman who moved to America and wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover. We've got classical literary criticism from Plato, Aristotle, Horace, Longinus. So like I said, it could be good criticism, could be terrible criticism. It's not hard to discover. This is a nice one. Mark Twain was at his best, when he was writing satire or when he was just angry. So this is called A Pen Warmed Up in Hell. Mark Twain in Protest. And I think it's just little excerpts from his letters and commentaries. Just being a smart guy. Simplified approach to Milton. Yeah, we'll see how simple they can make that story. Reading literature, William Blake. Oh, this is good. On the back it says, drawing on both Marxist and Derridian principles, Edward Larracy's account of Blake's clearly demonstrates how the problem of form is central both to the songs and the later prophetic works for Blake. Form and boundaries can be rigid, confining, and limiting, but paradoxically, limitation is necessary and freedom can be found within it. The roots of this ambiguity are located in the complex, contradictory intellectual and religious tradition within which Blake worked. Isn't that a very colorful word salad? Oh, nice. Selected letters of Joyce. I always get a little suspicious when it's like the selected letters, because I'm always like, oh, obviously you're not going to let anything real juicy be in there. But a lot of times, a writer is at their most honest in their letters, and you will catch them at their most vulnerable and their most confessional, and if they're writing a letter to their mother. I'm almost done, sweetie Pete. Then we're gonna go shopping. The English romantic poets and essayists. The Artist as Critic, Critical Writings of Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde, an overly sensual romantic, made a lot of bad decisions in his life, but he was a very witty man. And the last of all, the last book, we have Lord Chesterfield's Letters. Now, I've heard about this one. This book gets referred to a lot from other writers. It's basically the most, it's kind of like The Prince by Machiavelli, where it's just one of the Lord writing letters to his son, explaining to him in a very amoral way, this is what you have to do to get along with society. And so it's some of the best, worst advice, or worst, best advice that one human's ever given to another human. And so just kind of have to read it and break it down. So yeah, that's some literature. It's going to be fun to get into that and teach her slowly what it's all about. So yeah, we'll talk to you later.